So when I think of Angi, I think of, for example, like not air conditioning, like kitchen remodeling costs. You have so many great like cost guides, and pretty much anything around home services you likely have had content around. Whether or not you still will have it around everything is probably important discussion on this call. But you mentioned you're doing some interesting things with AI in particular, and would love to start there. Yeah, tell us about the program, the benefits you're seeing from that specifically, and we can kick off from that point if that sounds good.
Yeah. So when I joined Angi, I inherited a library of about like 5,000 roughly like pieces of content. Our cost guides made up a good chunk of that library, as you mentioned, like cost to remodel a bathroom, cost to repair a roof, etc. So in my tenure so far at Angi, we've been able to more than double the size of that library. Again, kind of under the spirit of being the home for everything home. So, how do we kind of move up funnel, become a little bit more informational, and help be that education for homeowners who are just not only trying to figure out costs, but like, what are warning signs? Should I repair or replace this appliance? Even some how to and DIY, we dipped our toes into when I first started, thinking like, let's help people troubleshoot. And if they find out that that this particular how to is really difficult, well, we have a great network of pros that you can tap into instead.
Nice.
So that was a big focus of just like growing the library across our robust category of home projects in the first few years of starting at Angi. And we saw really positive traffic and conversion outcomes from that effort. What's been really interesting, and I think a lot of content teams are seeing it, especially in the past year of AI overviews and user search behavior just in general changing, is some of this really high funnel content, while it might drive some visits, maybe occasionally it converts, it really isn't driving the outcomes that would warrant the human effort and labor to build it nowadays. And so that's why we've started exploring generative AI more, because if content teams are kind of at capacity in terms of the amount a person can create, how can we look and use generative AI as a tool to still maintain parts of our library that we know are valuable from a customer perspective? We know it's like good education and a good opportunity to grow brand awareness and visibility, but it's not going to be a revenue driver because people are just too early in their planning process. They're not quite ready to hire. They just need to gather more info. So that's kind of the early signs that led us to, let's start adopting this technology in our content creation process and see what kind of outcomes come from it.
So just to restate that back to you, essentially in the face of possible declines from top funnel AI overviews, maybe LLM searches, you actually it was kind of like that's gonna go away. Well, not completely, but a lot. The ROI is maybe not there, but we don't want to just shelve this thing, and that actually kind of almost embracing in some ways what's causing the decline to at least maintain some traffic and revenue from those assets. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's maybe a percentage of content that we lost traffic to that, we probably shouldn't have been ranking in for that in general. And that's a very common theme amongst content teams. Even anytime a Google algorithm update happens, you kind of reevaluate the keywords where you lost traffic to, and you think some of the keywords are like, no, we should appear here. And some of the keywords like, that wasn't really a priority to begin with. But then there's kind of that gray area of like, it it matters for us to be visible here, but we know again that the intent, the customer searching for this keyword is not ready to hire, not quite ready to convert. So how do we maintain it in the spirit of keeping that education still there? I think there's also, you touched on it a little bit in your question, but these AI, this AI search behavior, whether it's Google AI mode or OpenAI's ChatGPT or another service, is just starting to democratize a lot of general education and knowledge. A lot of our higher funnel keywords are just that content is becoming more of a common commodity. So how do we where content is more of a commodity, how do we use this generative AI tooling? And then where is the people time actually most valuable um, on that content versus not?
So some of those topics that I think of for you are relatively evergreen, like how to do something. I'm sure there's cost components that are iteratively changing. Like, what is AI actually updating in that case?
Yeah, I've said this story to my team and just like other people in the industry in our world. Like the way you repair a toilet has been the same since the modern day toilet has been
And I
invented.
still can't do it. Still can't.
Yeah, and I will never will never attempt it myself.
Yeah.
So that if we're thinking of, for example, like a how-to article, the actual steps don't why are we writing that over and over again? Because it's pretty much the same steps in different words. That doesn't make sense to maintain and refresh. But what would be valuable to put people effort on is maybe talking to a pro or interviewing a subject matter expert of what are the potential things that could go wrong in these steps? What is the risk of if you skip this step, you might flood the bathroom, or if you run into what are maybe some other repairs or problems that could arise while you're digging into this. So like that level of nuance and real experience I think is where the people time matters and how you can maintain this content without having to just bloat it with more evergreen information.
You mentioned traffic that's losing ground. That
Mhm,
was often the top funnel traffic a lot of time.
mhm.
It sounds like that's where you deployed AI to help in some way most often. So I'm just curious what kind of help it was providing. Is it like a full rewrite of that article just to stay fresh? Or is it a certain component? Is it injecting data in it? Is something else? That I'm curious that specific
Yeah,
point.
it's not a one size fits all. It's kind of a blend. And I think for content teams, I would maybe, it's going to be dependent on the maturity of your content library. So we have scenarios where it is more of a top to bottom refresh. We have scenarios where it's more injection of a specific element on the page. So it's kind of all the above, and we're looking at the quantitative data that tells us how much could we gain, and if there's a high opportunity to gain, then maybe it's a larger like push in terms of an update size. And that's kind of how we think about it, maybe a high level. So it's not like a one size fits all strategy.
Okay. So it's basically when there are losses, looking at it from that point of view, but knowing that it'll never be the same. So the update change should come from AI a lot. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
the yeah, where do you want to put the human time versus where do you want to put the technology
Right.
time?
Makes sense because you have a large. Could you give us context to how big the library of content is at Angie?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier it started at around like 5,000 articles. It's now grown to over 12,000. We've only a lot of that growth was actually human led still. So it's not like we tripled the library just from generative AI. A lot of that growth was still from human led efforts, I would say.
So what are some like less discussed ways you're using it? I mean, you mentioned in prior conversations that we chatted before this something around transformation and just general content ops. Would love to hear how you're thinking about it in those contexts.
Yeah, so the three pillars that we think about where to put this technology, we already talked about the first one, which is generation. So just net new content generation. The second one is transformation. So, how do you take an existing piece of content and transform it for another use case, whether that's to help someone in our CRM team or organic social team, or maybe it's cross brands. Like, how do we take something for Angi and apply it to Home Advisor? So that's how we define like transformation. And then finally is the operations. What are just the tedious things that people have to do as content creators that the end customer or user doesn't see, but does have to get done? Brief creation is the most common thing, but there's many other parts of the process to get an article live that can be streamlined.
Could you just rapid fire for us, like what those are?
Yeah, so there's certain automations. I mean, automated brief technology has been around for a while, even before AI made it popular. So that's quite common. Grammarly has a lot of editing tools within it, but you don't have to use Grammarly. You can even build your own of being able to grade a first draft. And so that helps an editor understand, can you um, how good is this first draft? How deep do you have to dig into it? All the way to even just ingestion, like automated ingestion from wherever your content sits into your CMS. These are so that you're not having to have a human manually copy and paste things into a CMS. These seem like really small actions of like maybe it's like 15, 30 minutes of someone's time. But when we're thinking about the scale of a company like mine, those minutes start to add up to significant work hours. And so it's a matter of looking through those parts of the operational flow and seeing, okay, where does it make sense to speed this up a little bit?
I mean, we think about moving from Google Docs over to WordPress, and that it's a commodity thing. There's skill in like knowing how a post feels and looks and things there that hopefully a good content marketer can do. But if basically it could pop in there and be 98% done, that'd be pretty powerful and probably
Right.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you, again, the human time, to your point, is more how do I build this page to be better for the customer and have a much nicer user experience, not
Yeah.
just highlighting paragraphs and moving them around.
So, so transformation, yeah, it's repurposing that content in lots of different ways. That's smart. It makes a lot of sense, and you're helping the teams out in that way. The AI side, obviously, there's been some applications and case studies of that not going as well as it could for many people. What are some use cases where it just didn't work? You tested it and didn't work as well as you thought, and what were the lessons you got from that?
Yeah, I would say where we've tested it and it doesn't work, eventually we've refined it to a place where it could. Or maybe we've scaled the project up or down with an understanding of where the human part should still be implemented. But there hasn't been many scenarios where we've tried to deploy this technology and it just flat out was unsuccessful and we trashed the project. Not to say that that won't happen in the future. It might. But I can say where it hasn't quite worked out or where we have just needed more people time than we initially expected was especially around content that has a bit of nuance to it and content where we have a very specific brand point of view that maybe differs slightly from the norm. So, an example would be, of course, we are in the business of connecting homeowners to pros. And going back to, for example, DIY content, but it comes up in many other topic areas, is a lot of times the generative AI technology will encourage the homeowner to continue troubleshooting a problem. And especially in topic areas like roof repair or HVAC or even remodeling, where these are really serious projects that oftentimes require a license to even do them or appropriate permitting. Those sort of more technical home improvement topics, we've had to have a much closer eye on what is being produced because we can't tell a homeowner to upgrade or replace Freon in their HVAC unit. like that's actually illegal to do. So
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that, we've had to retrain our workflows and retrain our models to get tighter on. We want to, of course, be encouraging and positive, but we don't want to encourage people to get on a ladder and climb up to their roof if they're not comfortable doing that. So that's maybe one area of refinement that we've had to think about and be careful about as we scale.
I know a lot of tools, and we're doing this where we think about using AI, have like a brand kit component where you like
Mhm.
upload brand guidelines and ha- have that assist with the process. Did you find that helpful, or just even in that situation, it came up a little short in what it gave you?
Yeah, so that is a perfect example of the refinement element where
Yeah.
we're probably giving it feedback through a knowledge kit or a brand kit. Another scenario where we've had to have a little bit more refinement or even sometimes had to just flat out reject the content is in topic areas like licensing. That is a very complex part of home services. I mentioned it earlier. There's a lot of jobs like electrical, plumbing, where licenses are just required. And it's a common question that homeowners have of, how do I know if a pro needs a license? How do I check for that? How do I validate that they have the right licensing? And so often that area is managed sometimes even at the county level, depending on where you live. And we just haven't been able to trust and validate at scale that these generative AI technologies can source that information reliably yet. Maybe that changes down the road. But again, it gets to like giving homeowners information that could potentially not be helpful is
Yeah,
the area where we've had to have a much closer eye.
makes sense. Are you doing anything with design at all, or is it just not there?
We are doing things with design, which have been really interesting to explore. And again, kind of in the same three pillars that I mentioned earlier. So, can we get it to generate a net new image or infographic? Can it transform an existing one? Or can it just make the operations way simpler for our designers? So, the same way that we apply those pillars and ways of thinking to the written word, we're also applying it visually. I think another really interesting thing is my team has been exploring a lot more in vibe coding, which is a term I learned from our engineering manager, Ryan, and it's now my favorite word. But how can we give people tools to build experiences, maybe as a proof of concept or even just to explain an idea in someone's head, not necessarily to just immediately push live. But that's another area of like user experience and generative technology that's been really interesting for us to explore too.
I'm guessing like stock photo generation. I know you're in home services. That could be pretty decent right now. Is there? I, I'm I'm amazed that like flow charts are like close on some of those things, but you've had success, kind of. I guess tweaking. It sounds like you're tweaking images. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like how can we again, it just requires that quality layer
Yeah.
from a designer, from a human. We've definitely in testing and trying to build things from scratch, seen kitchens where the faucet is on the ceiling
Yeah.
or a picture of a pro with an additional arm or holding a tool in a way that you just know naturally would not make sense. So the same quality checks again that we apply to written word, we're kind of applying to this too of just, does this pass the sniff test? Does this look like a natural image and does it meet our quality standards?
Makes sense. So, would love to just send you could share on design ops. Like, what is the time savings you found from AI on just anything operations on a design piece?
I think directionally, I can at least say that we've increased our production. I don't really have firm numbers of how much. It's an area compared to the content side, again, like the written word side, we have expanded quite a bit, and imagery is we're still in maybe the crawl stage of dipping our toes in the water and also testing out to see if users like this content. So that is often our approach as well before we just automatically, turn the dial to 11 and say, let's go make 1,000, 5,000 versions of this. Let's do more of a pilot project where we're launching it to a small percentage of users. We have the appropriate metrics in place and safeguards to understand what we want to learn from it. And I would say our design and image is probably in that stage right now where we're piloting some things to see, okay, are we hurting any existing metrics? Are users reacting positively or neutral to this experience we're introducing?
Is your main measurement there, engagement rate, conversions? You're kind of looking at that before, after, and making that
Yeah,
transition?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You've mentioned some mixed thoughts on whether or not we should be disclosing, whether or not we're using AI for things. Like, what was your insight on that piece?
Yeah, so I I think the way I think about it is that disclosure certainly matters, but the way in which you disclose matters just as much. And in which scenarios, because programmatic or AI content isn't necessarily new. It's just new to more of maybe the content marketing editorial space. But when I look, for example, on our directory side, we have a lot of content that's programmatically added to the page around common questions you might want to ask a pro, or the actual pro details of what their hours are and what their star rating is. I consider that also content. It's just not curated by a human. So we wouldn't ever consider putting some sort of AI or programmatic content label on a directory page that feels like a distraction. What we tested earlier this year was different methods of disclosure across the same article. So it's the same content, it was written by the same technology, and in areas where we put the disclosure right in the byline versus further down in the article, we were kind of just seeing what sort of input we'd get back from the user. What was really interesting is that users were pretty 50-50 split on if they trusted this content or not in the first place. And about half of users said, AI is already here. I already assume that most of the content I consume is written by AI. Not a big deal. And then some users said, it is an area of concern for me, or I'd like to know and I'd like to see that information disclosed. And so to see such a clear 50-50 split, I mean, when we went into testing, I actually thought it was going to be more 10% of users versus 90% wanting that disclosure, like a much wider gap.
Hmm.
So that was very interesting. And then we were able to get down to the specific variants of a more aggressive disclosure versus a less one, like more in your face versus less. And one eventually won out, which is the one we ended up going with. But it wasn't like super different reactions. It was almost pretty equal across the three variants that we provided too. So I think it's just going to be really interesting as this technology continues to advance. And I know Graphite recently came out with an interesting study that half of online content is already written by AI. I don't know how much that ratio is going to change over time, but it'll just be really interesting to see what users expect in terms of disclosure. And as a brand, of course, we're probably going to disclose in cases where it's most relevant, but how you disclose really is just going to depend on your user and the industry you operate in.
Did you use it? It sounds like you did like actual user testing videos or something like
Hmm.
that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your if you can share, do you go to like, I know there's a usertesting.com, like, could you have a preferred tool for that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many out there. So I think it ultimately depends on the content team's budget. I've heard of like Hotjar, user testing, so many others. So I don't think there's a wrong tool to go with. There's many that specialize in this. But I've found it really helpful to get that qual analysis to combine with the quant.
Yeah, makes sense. Smart. So you said in a perfect world, AI is like doing the commoditized piece of this work, and then the team that's human is doing new things, adding new value to the content. Like, what are some examples of that new value your team found and was improving content that it wasn't previously?
Yeah, so some of those areas of value that we found are, as I mentioned earlier, trying to state our point of view and our perspective of, hey, these are the actual risks. We talk a lot internally of, does the homeowner have the tools, time, or talent? So even for really simple projects like home cleaning, maybe you don't want to spend your weekend doing that activity. So we layer in that kind of language where it makes sense, that again, you can kind of train a model to adopt that same thinking, but our human touch is nice to have there too, to really speak to the customer plainly of, you should hire a pro for this. This is really important to do. That's one example. We love talking to our pros, interviewing our pros, understanding what are the particular challenges and what they're seeing in the industry when they talk to homeowners in their area. So, how do we collect that information, digest it, and then put it on the page for another homeowner to learn from? And then finally, we are trying to dig in more to ownable, original, unique data. You mentioned at the top, our cost guides are a huge moat that we have in our content. That's original data that we collect directly from homeowners. There's a lot of other data that we could mine for in our product that we just haven't had the time for because we were busy writing for so long. But now we have the heads up time to dig into that a bit more.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, data collection, huge part of what we do now, and so much more of it. But it makes sense. Just energy and budget can actually go towards whether it's getting out of what you have, or maybe it's also generating that data. And then AI can sometimes be fruitful at describing that unique data you have
Yeah,
and making it differentiated.
I think especially I'm very fortunate to have a team of, we call them researchers, but they're essentially SEO content analysts. So they're people who are very comfortable in spreadsheets and in analytics platforms. But I also have a team of editors and writers. And I have found this technology to also, to your point, be really helpful in helping people who maybe analytics isn't their initial skill set or strong suit, compiling data, digesting it in a way that a storyteller can understand more clearly. Because that is where their skill set comes in, you know, of, oh, okay, now I understand what this data is telling me and how I can package it to a homeowner.
Yeah. Yeah. Super helpful to have AI analyze that. Of course, we need to be careful of it hallucinating at points.
Mhm.
But as long as you got a good editor in there, QA and everything, I think we're in a good spot.
Exactly.
So, yeah, anything I didn't ask, Caroline, that is super interesting. I appreciate you sharing how you're using AI, but any other lessons or things that were helpful?
It's a good question. I mean, I think I've talked a lot about the world of generative AI for content teams and how using this technology can help fuel content creation. I think there's a whole other part of this discussion around how AI is changing search behavior and how content teams should react to these AIs getting just more and more proficient at generating checklists, generating calculators, like creating utility for people, not just answers. And that is a world that I think is interesting and I'm thinking about as I start to plan out my 2026, basically.
Yeah. Are you essentially commenting on like, are what content types could also be disrupted? Is that sort of what you're noodling on? Am
Yeah,
I reading that?
exactly. Like, what content types will continue to be disruptive aside from just your standard high funnel um, article?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what else could be there as these platforms just
Get
start to
better.
get more advanced and also what like are users going to like it? I don't know yet. I'm really interested to see. I know there's a ton of data right now that, Google is still the dominant search engine in terms of users, but ChatGPT is growing. I It'll be interesting to see how user behavior just continues to evolve and how we should react as content teams to that behavior
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. The ChatGPT Atlas browser that just came out, I'm sure could have some impact on you over time. Maybe positive of people researching. For people who don't know, I think most people know, but there's like an agentic experience that will crawl the web and
Right.
actually could actually call. I don't think it's quite there to actually call pros, but I'm guessing that will be there pretty. It exists disconnected from those two, where it can like robo call and make a restaurant reservation for you.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, I'm sure Angie is thinking about all of those things. Well, Caroline, where should people find you? LinkedIn. We'll link in the show notes. But any other?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hit
yeah,
hit me up on LinkedIn. I am a social media Luddite otherwise, so you will mostly find me on LinkedIn. Reach out. I'm always happy to chat about these things. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
yeah. Good to have the best content and conversation host back to make it this way better. So thank you, Caroline. Good seeing you.
Yeah, same.